Hi everyone, my name is Hannah Hess and I'm here to talk to you today about the book that we are reading, which is called Cultivating Genius, and I'm here to focus on Chapter 3, which is called Toward the Pursuit of Identity. So before we get really specific into Chapter 3, I just want to take just a second to talk about the title of the book, which is called Cultivating Genius. And in our introduction, these are where these quotes come from, but just that cultivating the genius that already lies within students and teachers. That's what this whole book is focusing on. And just the idea of developing the existing genius within ourselves and within our students. So I just wanted to mention that to keep that in mind as we're thinking about the specifics of this chapter. And just because it helps me before we get really specific into this chapter also, this is focusing on the historically responsive literacy framework. And in Chapter 3, I'll be focusing on identity development, but then we'll see the other four, categories of this framework. Skill development, intellectual development, and criticality. I hope I said that right. Okay. So I'm going to try to keep this brief, but just going into my top 10s. So the first one is the students must speak for themselves. So I just really like this because this little passage mentions about how students need opportunities to speak for themselves. And I believe leading up to this sentence, it basically talks about how teachers, no matter how inspired, educated, no matter how well they know their students, no one else can speak for the students but themselves. So I just thought that was really powerful and important. And then number 2, we must start their stories and identities with their excellence. So I'll get to this in a second, maybe, but I think I have somewhere else in here. Just talking about seeing students from an asset-based lens, I think, if I remember correctly, it all kind of jumbles together, but this passage is talking about how they asked teachers to describe their students, and a lot of teachers started describing their students with, well, they struggle with this, they struggle with that, they're struggling readers, they struggle with behavior, and just a list of things that students struggle with to describe them, and then basically it says, well, do you think teachers would describe their own children that way? No. So why are you describing your students that way? So anyways, it doesn't say asset-based lens in the text, but that's immediately what I thought of whenever I read it, and just how important that is to start students with their identities of their excellence. So, number 3. Youth need opportunities in school to explore multiple facets of selfhood, but also to learn about the identities of others who may differ. So this does a really good job of portraying a lot of the big picture of this chapter, and just the fact that students need opportunities to discover themselves, but to also learn about the identities of others, like different cultures, different types of people, what goes on outside of just their community and just their classroom. They need opportunities to discover more than that. But that being said, they also need opportunities to figure out, who am I, So, all right, keep moving. I'm trying to keep it quick. Okay, number 4. All students need to feel, this one's not a quote, this one's from me. All students need to feel confident in knowing themselves regardless of their academic standing. So there's a little passage in this part on page 68 where it basically gives the story of a student and how she was very academically successful, but she just didn't feel like she knew herself. And I feel like that's a really easy thing for teachers to do, is just to focus on the academically struggling students. But that's not what we need to do. We need to focus on all of our students and helping them discover themselves individually, like each of them. Just because a student may be, doing well academically doesn't mean they don't need the opportunity to figure out their own identity. Okay. Whew, I'm trying to keep it quick, but I'm running short on time, so it may be a little longer, and I'm sorry. But number 5. Students must authentically see themselves in learning. So just the idea, and I don't think it says this in the text, but this is, of course, immediately what I thought of, but just windows and mirrors. Students need opportunities in books, but they need opportunities in every aspect of learning to have windows and mirrors, to see themselves in the things that they are learning, but to also see others, other people, other cultures, just how everything is outside of the community, everything was in the past. So just the idea of windows and mirrors, I think, is really important. And Dr. Meyer has mentioned this to me like years ago. I guess it has been years ago now, and that has just stuck with me forever. So I think that's really important. Okay. Ask students to tell you in their own words how they see their various identities, and when they tell you who they are, listen and trust them. So whenever I started to quote this, I started to just put the first sentence, and then I was like, no, you know what? The second sentence is just as important, if not more important. So we need to ask students to tell in their own words, their own stories to describe their identities. But when they tell us, we need to listen and trust them. Like, that is so important, because I feel like it's really easy for teachers to be like, yeah, tell me about yourself. Like, I want to know who you are. I want to know your identity. But then it's like, ooh, I also have like 20, 30 students, so I may like half listen and I may like half remember. Like, no, it's important for every single student, each student. So, on to the next. Okay, so there's another section. The section's called Tell Our Name Stories. And then, anyways, the point I want to make here is that names are an important part of who we are. And whenever I read this section, it really made me think of this article that I read recently that I really just fell in love with. Some of you may have seen it before, read it before, but I linked it here if not. It's called La Historia de mi nombre. I'm taking Spanish, so I should know how to say that. But anyways, it's basically a lesson. It's for like bilingual, like Spanish-speaking students, of course, but very relevant to all students. But it's basically just an activity for students to discover the history of their name. And I just think that's such a cool article. Very cool, like, first day of school activity. But just a very important way to get students to know a little bit more about themselves and who they are. And anyway, so I just linked that here, and it's definitely worth the read. Okay. Number 8, studying the histories of Black communities is a good starting place for learning about racially, culturally, and linguistically diverse students. So after I got pretty deep into this chapter, I'm like, this is all great information, but where do I start? And then this section really answered that for me. Like, this is where we start, because one part it mentions earlier in the chapter that Black communities are often left out of the content and standards. So this is a good starting point. Let's learn more about other people, other cultures that are not included in the standards, that are not included in things we have to learn. And I know that seems like just more work for the teachers, but it's so important for our students. If they don't see themselves in their learning, why would they be interested? But we don't understand. Well, I don't understand that, because I can see myself in the learning of the Tennessee state standards. You know what I mean? But there could be students and they feel like their identities are left out of those standards. So that's why we have to go a little bit of the extra mile and include things that help them see part of who they are, which is their history of their community and their family and their culture. So it's really important to include those things. Okay. I know this is getting long, and I'm very sorry. Trying to keep it quick, but so on page 78 and 79, we see a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. And after, of course I read it and was like, yes, this is it. But then I was like, you know what? I started to type the quote, and I was like, you know what? No, I want to find this speech. I want to find a video of this speech. So I found this video, and I have down here in the bottom right, the time frame of, the quote that he actually says in the book. So if you just want to watch from the quote that he says in the book, then that's the time frame for it. The whole video is 20 minutes long of his entire speech. But I have it set so when you click play on the video, it will start at 3:19. So
question.
So you can see that it automatically starts at 3:19, so you can, and I have it so it will stop at 4:59. So you can just watch that quote. But anyways, the quote is talking about what is your life's blueprint. And it's just such a great analogy, and especially for like elementary students, to be able to understand, okay, well, I understand that I need a blueprint to be able to make a building. Anyways, and then you can relate that to, okay, what is your blueprint? What lays out who you are, your life, your culture, your identity? What is it about you that makes up your blueprint? And I just think that is a great tool to help bridge the gap of help start that understanding for students of learning their own identities. And along those same lines, this chapter ends with a lesson sample, and I honestly busted out laughing whenever I read this lesson sample because, like, this is fabulous. Like, this is so great. But it's just like, okay, let me just start. So the lesson sample is for identity. Students will learn about their own blueprints in life, their personal identity. And it has a lesson idea for ELA, science, math, and social studies. Anyway, so it was basically, I mean, in a very professional and respectful way, but I felt like the indirect message of including this lesson sample was like, you don't have an excuse. You don't have an excuse no matter what kind of teacher you are, what grade level teacher you are, what subject teacher you are. Like, you don't have an excuse for not teaching these things. Like, here is how you do it for every subject. And I just honestly busted out laughing because I'm like, this is so funny. Like, this is so fabulous that they have included this, but it's just funny, I guess. Hopefully you know what I mean. But anyways, this is basically for just when teachers ask, well, how do I incorporate this when I'm just a science teacher? How do I incorporate this when I'm just a math teacher? All I'm supposed to do every day is come to school and teach them math. How am I supposed to incorporate them learning about their identities, you know? And that is a tough question, but like, this is a great answer for that. So I just thought that was really important to take the time to look at this and think about it. Okay, to end all of that, I'm so sorry that this video has been a little bit lengthy and I didn't keep it under 5 minutes, but the big idea that I feel like I got from this chapter was having students know themselves and having students have opportunities to learn about others. So, that being said, Lauren and I came up with this question to ask you, and it is, how will you help students develop the identity of themselves and others in your classroom? So after all this information that we just read in this chapter, and of course there's already a lot of great examples in this chapter, but I think the important part of when we read something like this is just to reflect on ourselves and think, okay, what am I going to take away from this and how am I going to apply this? And that's it. So sorry this video is a little lengthy, but hopefully it was better than reading like a long essay or something that I could have typed out. Much easier for me to just verbally explain, but I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope you all enjoyed this chapter, and I look forward to our discussion later, and I will see you all next time. Bye.